Good morning and afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar on the power of connected planning for call centers. As a reminder, you may submit questions through the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. Simply write your question into the field and hit send. Today's speakers are Stylianos Kapoudakas and Senior Associate at Spaulding Ridge, and Mike Arden, Strategy Manager at Telus. Stylianos, take it away.
Thanks, Ellen. All right, so we'll jump right in here. There's the two mugs you see at the top of your screen that Ellen just introduced. Thanks for that, Ellen. Jump right into our agenda here. So today we're going to go through a little bit about how Telus transformed their organization's call center planning, how they've managed to track and really build an approval flow through the power of Anaplan, really, but with Spaulding Ridge's support, of course, in the partnership between us three, Telus, Spaulding Ridge, and Anaplan. So what we'll walk through today is a little introduction on Spaulding Ridge, ourselves as well, of course, the solution that we've implemented at Telus. Mike will be speaking to that a little bit, and then we'll open up quite a bit of time towards the end for any Q&A that the team might have. So we can field those questions. Feel free to pop those into the Q&A as we go along here. And if throughout the presentation there is something that comes up that we can speak to, well, happy to pause and address those questions as well. All right, so a little bit about Spaulding Ridge. We're a boutique management consulting firm that serves clients globally by enabling organizations to accelerate their operational efficiency and drive transformation while increasing their competitive advantage using best-in-cloud solutions. So we've got quite a few software vendors that we partner with, and by the numbers here, we've implemented over 500 cloud solutions in partnership with our software vendors across over 20 countries since the company's inception about 3 years ago. Our impact in various industries and verticals in that short period of time kind of speaks to our aggressive growth at Spaulding Ridge, but also the obvious demand for digital transformation in today's environment. So we'll keep it pretty short and sweet. I want to make sure we focus on Telus here, of course, and not so much on Spaulding Ridge. So we'll pivot next to a little bit of an overview on Telus. For those of you that may not be aware, Telus is a national leader in Canadian telecommunications. They were founded about 3 decades ago in 1990, and they provide a wide range of products and services, including TV, internet, mobility, and smart home security. We'll dive a little bit into those offerings in just a moment here. But what's really impactful, I think, is that they employ over 10,000 call center agents across several different countries. And it goes to show kind of the impact of Telus as a whole, but also how impactful the solution is and how valuable it is to the resource strategy and analytics group that we've been supporting. So this is where I think Mike and I can really start to kind of play back and forth and discuss where we were about a year ago when we first engaged with Telus. And really, Mike, I'll hand it over to you. What were the pain points you were experiencing at the time we engaged about a year ago?
Yeah, thanks, Eliana. So when we first engaged with Spaulding Ridge, our main pain point was we had built a Anaplan system. So we were an early adopter. We had a small team dedicated to building Anaplan, and we had really developed it kind of from the ground up and kind of hit our break point from what more we could do. We couldn't really build a more sophisticated model with the team that we had. And then we also went through some organizational change. We restructured, and what that meant is we had to combine some of our services from a call center planning capacity. So we had to take our home services teams and our wireless teams and really combine the planning functionality between them and see how we could integrate the models together.
Right. And that initial exercise of kind of performing, what was essentially optimization in the existing models, right? That was, an effort on the more technical side that involved kind of bridging the gap between not only the structures of the home services side, but also the wireless side, right? So what we really discovered as we started to dive into the discovery of this project was that we needed to find a way to kind of bridge that structure together and create kind of a common planning structure for both sides of the business to adopt. That way we could, plan equivalently and really kind of compare apples to apples between the two sides of the business.
Yeah, that was one of the biggest hurdles we had to overcome, was that because we had built two separate Anaplan systems, one for our home services, one for wireless offerings, they weren't comparable, and we had no way to easily merge those two platforms together and plan our business going forward. And that's where Spaulding Ridge came in to really help us understand the commonality between the home services and wireless sides, and where we could connect them and build kind of a new path forward, build a new hierarchy to plan our business.
Right, and I think as well, right, the existing models, all of the planning was being done at almost like a financial level, where cost center by cost center, you had agents rolling into those kind of management units, but that wasn't necessarily the level of granularity that you would expect yourself to plan at. And really there was probably some efficiency to be gained planning at a higher level. So I think that was the other realization, was that we could almost kind of roll up those cost centers and those kind of more granular facets of the business into what we define as like the role level, or kind of just by skill or kind of by function. We can organize the agents that way and plan against that instead.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We had built a model where we were planning at the lowest possible level, and the work effort to maintain models in that manner was too cumbersome, and we needed too many resources to do it. So as we merged the two models together, one thing we were able to do is move up the hierarchy 3 steps. So instead of planning, I think it was about 150 metrics each month, we could now plan 20 metrics each month. And then, through the implementation of Anaplan, we were able to have it calculate out down to the lower level for us. So we can spend our time managing the business at the level we typically manage, and let the numbers kind of fall out as they may, right, and get calculated out.
Right, yeah, and just understanding as well. And this was something kind of already innately understood by the Telus group, but driving into those kind of finer details doesn't always change the actual impact of the plan, right? So finding those opportunities where we could simplify was kind of top of mind in that restructuring process. But I think that fairly, at least initially here, I think that covers off kind of that initial point of optimization restructuring. But one of the other, kind of pain points that we discovered in not necessarily the initial phase where we were doing that optimization, but a little bit later on, was how we actually interlock with some of the teams that Resource Strategy and Analytics, the team that Mike's a part of, actually field for inputs, whether they be kind of invoice accrual data, forecasts, projections, anything of that sort, to kind of integrate either training requirements or offshore vendor inputs. So that was really where we started to kind of filter through a series of Excel models and Google Sheets that were kind of called all over the place, and try to integrate those into kind of clean solutions within Anaplan that could become the single source of truth that everybody could rely on.
Yeah, one of the biggest issues we were running into is we were managing a lot of our performance in Excel or through the transfer of data through email or Google Sheets. And we wanted to get that into Anaplan, so everything was connected to what we were planning and then what we were actually seeing as well. And that was, again, an issue we were running into, that we had too many files kind of out there in the cloud. And then the other thing, the bottom bullet there, is we were only planning for our domestic Canadian call centers in Anaplan. And there was a strong desire that we needed to expand that scope to really include our Telus International or vendor planning as well, and have those capabilities. And that all of that included as well with, again, our Canadian centers. So we had a full view of our operations.
Yeah, and something that we didn't initially have in the models when we first arrived was the demand projections as well, right? So actually being able to create actionable results from the information in Anaplan, because at that point in time when we first engaged, really those two models only encompassed supply side on the onshore piece, like you just mentioned. So actually rolling in the demand side as well to find that equilibrium and kind of calculate some of the, the typical call center planning metrics that we're familiar with, ASA, abandon rate, calls waiting greater than 5 minutes, things like that we'll address probably in the next slide here during the solutions portion. But really bringing kind of the all-encompassing data set to the model so that we can perform like actionable insights that aren't just one piece of the pie. It's more holistic in nature, and that can kind of be presented up the chain as valuable scenarios.
Yeah, we had a really segmented planning process, right? We would plan in Anaplan for our Canadian centers. We would plan in Google Sheets for our vendors, and then we would plan in Excel for our demand planning to put against that. And so we're doing 3 different things to try and build a proper supply and demand model. And again, that's one of the biggest hurdles we had to overcome, is how to get all 3 of those items into one system.
So I think that's probably a logical segue here. We can kind of pivot to how we actually started tackling each of those pain points. So I can speak a little bit, to the Anaplan side of it first, just because Anaplan has evolved greatly since it was initially implemented at Telus. So namely, application lifecycle management introduced like a level of abstraction between what was once a single standalone model. So production was where you incorporated new functionality, you imported data, you kind of did everything in a one-stop shop, where when we arrived, we actually implemented a way to actually defer those 2 aspects of the modeling, right? So you could be performing work in progress activities in a development model while end users were interacting with production, and you didn't have that fear of potentially damaging some inputs or overwriting what some users were working on. So that was a nice feeling of security, being able to roll that out. And in actuality, it's not all too great of a lift to incorporate that, but just the nature of the software itself growing the way that it has, we've been able to take advantage of those developments as well. And so so would anybody else incorporating the solution in their organization. And a big thing sorry, yeah, go, absolutely, Mike, go ahead.
The application lifecycle management was one of the items that I don't think we understood we needed, because like you said, we would use the production Anaplan model that we had implemented and just run with updates and changes as they occurred. But now what we have is, as you said, we have a development model where we can test out, reorganize if we need to, adjust our hierarchy, and then we can push that out into the productive model once we know everything's going to work. And just having that capability has safeguarded what we've implemented, but then also allows us, again, to be nimble and continue to enhance the model. And like I said, going into this partnership, we didn't know we needed something like that, but it's one of the biggest wins that we had.
Absolutely, and I think that kind of plays hand in hand with the next bullet there on the data hub revamp and reorganization. So something that already existed in Telus's model was what we refer to as a data hub. So really like a landing zone for every data set that they would need in their modeling. And so what we've done is revamped it as it reads there, but what that really means is incorporate all of those structures that we spoke to in the previous slide, really bridging that kind of supply hierarchy roll-up and demand hierarchy roll-up in a centralized location that can be managed from one spot, as opposed to in several different models the way it once was, separately in the home services model and separately as well in the wireless model. So you have a source of consistency where, not only Mike, but his counterparts on the other side of the business can collaborate and look at one consistent structure and then push that to that same model that's in development. And I think there we've kind of already tackled it a little bit, but speaking to like the consolidation of the 2 Telus lines of business that we're speaking to into one model, And of course, like I just kind of alluded to, redesigning the supply and demand hierarchies to enable ease of planning. So one thing that we work towards as well in bringing the new set of demand data to their model was actually bridging what are two disparate data sets. So the information we received for the supply side was organized in a completely different way than what was present on the demand side. So finding common ground at that kind of desirable role level where Mike mentioned there was considerably fewer inputs, finding equilibrium there so that we can compare apples to apples between supply and demand, where prior to Anaplan, a lot of that work was kind of done back of the napkin. Some of the kind of the structures maintained outside of Anaplan were less rigid in nature, and it changed very frequently over time. So this kind of offered a layer of governance to their overall process that I'm sure Mike can speak to.
Yeah, just to drill down on that one a little bit more, we would have, let's say, 5 layers of hierarchy, both on the supply and demand side, but they're really only aligned from the levels 1, 2, and 3. So what we can do now in Anaplan is manage our supply and demand at the 3rd level of the hierarchy, roll it up to the stages 1 or 2 as we go higher up, and output that to the leadership teams as necessary. But it also allows our analysts to go down to levels 4 or 5 individually for supply and demand and manage those elements as needed. So we can plan our business at a nice middle ground, but get reporting and deep dive analysis into each of the specific data points.
Exactly. And really on the, the heart and soul of the model here, right? The actual call center planning that we're performing. Once we had all of that information localized in one, consistent manner, we were able to actually build up a full call center planning model, right? Where we were conducting that equilibrium analysis, trying to see where supply met demand, where shortfalls existed, both in the short term and the long term. I think that's something very interesting about Telus's model is how far out the planning horizon can be. We think about like a 5-year plan or, maybe potentially a little bit shorter than that, but understanding how training and how their agents are kind of evolving over time is something that's very important to how we've structured the model. So, a little bit to that, not only are we forecasting agent supply and capturing those demand forecasts, but we're highlighting the variances over, a long period of time. And because we are looking at a kind of a higher level of granularity, we have that luxury, right? Sometimes when we drill much too deep into the details, we don't have the luxury of consuming, extensive data sets, and really the people reviewing that, may not necessarily even be inclined to go to that level of detail that far out into the planning horizon. So I think that's one of the other biggest factors that we keep in mind all the time, Mike.
Yeah, and as you said, we have a kind of 3-year horizon for when we're reviewing our supply and demand models, but then we do get very detailed in kind of the next 3 months and what the specifics of that plan look like and where the variances are. And the one functionality you mentioned, we call it snapshotting, where at the beginning of each month, we can record exactly what the supply and demand model looks like, and we can drill down into any specific item from there. And then that way it allows us, in April to compare what we were planning for in March and what's changed and how that plan has evolved, so we can speak to that difference.
Yeah, exactly. Pivoting a little bit here, just even, a little bit more into kind of how Anaplan is, providing some of those projections even on its own prior to the team's inputs. So what the existing model actually already included was a statistical forecasting package that allowed us to forecast certain agent supply levers, such as attrition and shrinkage, namely. So what we have incorporated in the model is essentially a baseline for some of those calcs, and what the team's able to do, and this goes beyond even attrition and shrinkage, is actually override those values, right? So it gives them a starting point, and then they're able to massage the data as they see fit, given some of the factors that may not be incorporated in the model today, but could be tomorrow, right? So having that override functionality has been very powerful. We're able to kind of provide baselines and then layer in adjustments on top of that.
Yeah, and just to top up on that, when I mentioned on the issues that we were making 150 inputs, that was really at the attrition level, the shrinkage layer. So we were making 150 inputs each month for each of these metrics, and Now what Anaplan does for us is it calculates out what our attrition forecast should be, and then we can go in and review it at a higher level and decide whether to use that or put in a manual input. And we get to do that for really all of our planning metrics, whether it's shrinkage or other factors.
Okay. I think we've got a question, Mike, here. I can read it out and maybe we can speak to it a little bit. I'm not sure that it necessarily concerns the solution as we've created it today, but we can certainly speak to it. So it reads, what outcomes can you share as far as service levels, occupancy, et cetera, from before and after, and does Anaplan allow for that prediction? I think that probably ties into our last bullet there on some of the native Anaplan functionality. So there are certain formulations that Anaplan has built in out of the box that would calculate SLA, would calculate occupancy. Now, in the Telus model specifically, that's not necessarily something that we're looking at as an output. The metrics that we see listed there are typically what they've been concerned with, but in other call center planning models, that's certainly something that we've seen done.
Yeah, for the Telus modeling, what we use is more of a average speed of answer output. So when we look at it, we look at our supply-demand gaps or variances and use that to calculate out what our average speed of answer will be for a given month or a given week. So not necessarily a traditional service level, but more the wait time you can expect or the calls waiting time frame for our customers.
So I've seen a few more pop in, so I feel like it's probably timely to just jump into the fireside chat here. So please keep the questions coming and we'll continue working down the list here. If we don't manage to get to everything, we will follow up offline after the fact. So we'll be able to package this up and reply to some of these questions even after. So Mike and I can kind of collaborate and get back to those that we don't here and now. So the next one, I think it's a bit of a dupe. So does Anaplan allow for service level predictions? Yes. Is it being used? And what about occupancy? I think Mike covered that. This is a good question.
The one part,
yeah,
sorry,
go ahead.
Billy, the one part about occupancy though, we do use that more as an input metric for our calculation. Still, said require your expertise if Anaplan or if that's something that we can implement is more of a predictive measure on occupancy.
Right, so it is something that we could predict in Anaplan as well, but yeah, to Mike's point, we effectively use like a proxy today to inform the forecast. Yeah. So our next question here, how does Anaplan integrate with IEX and performance management tools, etc.? So we accept data sets from IEX. So in terms of an integration with the tool itself, it's certainly possible. There may be some ETL between the actual workforce management platform itself and Anaplan, but we've been able to consume IEX data without issue and really bridge any of the kind of the attributes that we have in the workforce management tool on an agent level from their scheduling and incorporate that in our planning.
Yeah, and to give maybe a little bit more detail on that one, Telus does use IEX as well, and we have been able to integrate in, whether it's MU mapping or CT mapping for both demand and supply data sets. So we do have that set up today where, again, as Stiliano said, it has to be uploaded. We do it on a as needed basis or once per month where we upload actual data and then do our forecasting either, both in tandem in IEX, but also through Anaplan at a higher level.
All right. Does Anaplan consider the agent base composition for tenure? In other words, if I'm adding new hires, does it automatically calculate new assumptions for average handle time, attrition, shrinkage, etc.?
Yeah. So in our model today, so just referring to the Telus model, it doesn't calculate it automatically, but we do have metrics or definitions where we can assign week 1, an agent will be this productive, week 2, they'll be this, X productive, and then as well with AHT, we can map that out as well. Those would be metrics that you would have to define for the tenure of the agents, but that is something that we have used in our new hire planning.
Right. Can you share what type of modeling is being done behind the scenes? ARIMA, I'm not exactly familiar with that term, et cetera. Does that get shared with the business? Maybe we can circle back to that one after. Mike, I'm not sure if you're familiar with that term, ARIMA, but can take a look at that.
Sorry.
Okay. No, no worries. So we'll pivot to the next question here. What was the time involved in the issue analysis and solutions implementation? So typically with our projects, we follow what's typically referred to as the Anaplan way within the vendor itself, but it's really a modified agile framework. So what we do towards the beginning of every project and every implementation is a foundations phase, which is really where we level set with the internal team. We spent about a week collaborating, call it a 40-hour work week, actually drilling into the requirements, understanding what the greater roadmap was for Telus. And something I don't know that we spoke to in the solution, but is certainly relevant to this question, is how we actually took a piecemeal approach to the implementation. So we had kind of two buckets that you guys saw in the slide deck, where initially we started with some optimization and restructuring. So really getting their model from yesterday into current world. And then from there started incorporating enhancements on top of that, bringing in new data sets. And that was all planned out in about a 1 to 2 week period where we were able to understand what the vision was at that point in time. And then, as the months went on, right, we had several phases of implementation, one of which we're currently involved in today. And that's continuing on that roadmap, that evolving roadmap, I'll also say, right? So we didn't necessarily have all the answers, call it a year ago, but as time's gone on, there's been certain requirements that have kind of fallen off, some that have come into being. And so we've remained flexible throughout that period as well, and kind of tracking to what's most important to tell us at any point in time.
And Dylan, if we want to go back to the what type of modeling is being done behind the scenes,
sure.
Just did a quick search on that. It looks like it's a timescale forecasting. So just to articulate on that one a little bit, we have in our models a variety of different forecasting methods that we use. The one we've settled on right now is more regression analysis. So what we do is we're adding in our regression coefficients into Anaplan to have it calculate out what our expected wait times and different forecasted metrics would be. We do use moving averages for attrition, shrinkage, and a few other metrics as well. So what we've been able to do is really blend a variety of different forecasting methods depending on the metric and what is best suited to forecast it. And that is done all behind the scenes. We don't typically share that type of insight with our leadership teams, but it is detail we could get from Anaplan as needed.
Awesome. Thanks for the background research there as well.
No problem.
So, yeah, I think we're pretty much all caught up with questions here. Feel free, to our audience, feel free to continue to ping us with those questions. Whether that be to myself, just pop over to some of our contact information here before we wrap up. So feel free to send this information or any further questions that you have after the webinar to myself, to our partner in the practice, Tasso Ciatris. He can also forward those to me. But I want to take this last minute here to thank Mike from Telus for joining us and providing all those valuable insights. It's a pleasure to work with not only Mike, but the rest of the resource strategy and analytics team at Telus. And if you ever kind of cross paths with these folks in the future, I can assure you it'll be a pleasure. But with that, I think we'll leave it there. So Ellen, I think we're all set. Thank you guys for joining and have a great day.